We are live. Isn't it good to be live?
It's better than the alternative.
Absolutely. So, ladies and gentlemen, our audience around the world, I want to introduce you to my wonderful guest of today, whose name is Dan Gutman. And I've never interviewed anybody like you. I've interviewed people that have one book, 5 books, 10 books, 80 books, but never 190 books. And Dan, you're not going to believe this, but you're my 190th interviewee.
Really?
No, but it sounds good. Something like that. I'll count and I'll tell you. About 185. Anyway, it's great to have you on the show. How are you?
Good, Mel. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here, and it's so fascinating to talk to somebody who's all the way around the world, and it's like we're in the next room.
Yeah, and the sun is shining here, and it's shining in Manhattan. And so, hello from Israel to all of our readers and listeners and watchers. And Dan, we're here to talk about your wonderful brand new book, which just launched a month ago. But before we do that, we want to thank Elizabeth, because Elizabeth Law brought us together, and she also brought you together with Cleopatra.
Yes,
So
and my book is dedicated to her.
So Elizabeth, thank you for organizing all the book and the interview.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
So yeah, so Dan, tell us about this book. It's called The Mostly True Story of Cleopatra's Needle. It's out with Holiday House, which is a wonderful publisher. Tell us all about it.
Yeah, it's interesting. The story goes back to the pandemic, when everything. I live in New York City, and everything shut down, as it did all over the world. And so every day I would take a bike. I live across the street from Central Park, and every day I would ride my bike around the loop. There's a 6-mile loop in Central Park, and
I love it. I love that loop.
Oh yeah, it's great. Very hilly for Central Park. Anyway, I'd ride my bike around the loop, and in the middle of the ride, I would see this giant obelisk in the middle of Central Park. And for people who don't know what an obelisk is, it's like the Washington Monument is an obelisk, but this is not the Washington Monument. This is in the middle of Central Park. It's 7 stories high. It's 220 tons. And I didn't know what it was. I didn't know how it got there or what it was. So I started researching it, and because I had nothing else to do during the pandemic, right? So I learned that this thing was carved 3,500 years ago in Egypt and brought to America in 1880, I should say. And I thought, whoa, they didn't have trucks. The airplane hadn't been invented yet, no cars, no computers. And somehow someone figured out how to take this thing that was standing up in Alexandria, Egypt, and lower it horizontal, stick it in a boat. Hang on, I have a picture. They stuck it in a boat. They cut a hole in a boat, slid it into the boat, shipped it across the Atlantic Ocean, dragged it across the island of Manhattan, and stood it up in the middle of Central Park. And I thought, whoa, how come nobody knows about this? And I thought this was a story that deserved to be told. And so I decided to tell it. And because I write for children, I decided to tell it through the eyes of 6 children, actually 5 who participated in the creation of Cleopatra's Needle, and diary form. So 2 of them are girls, 3 of them are boys. And it was just a real labor of love for me. I don't know if the world really cares about Cleopatra's Needle. Usually when I write a book, I'm thinking about, oh, does this have market potential? Are kids going to buy this? I just thought, look, I'm interested in it. Maybe other people will be interested in it too. And so that's why I wrote the book.
Incredible. And so you said that Elizabeth played a large role in this. She was an editor at Holiday House. Tell tell us more about how the book happened.
Yeah, Elizabeth and I, we've been working together for a long time. She was my first children's book editor when I started 30 years plus ago. And we hadn't worked together for a long time. And then she reached out to me a few years back and said, "Hey, we should do some stuff together." And so the first book we did together, I don't know if you saw this one, Mel. It's called Houdini and Me. About
Yes,
Oh, you saw it. Okay. It's
a
about
few
Harry.
well, a few words because I'm a Houdini fan.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, well, I'll just tell you briefly about this book. I live 8 blocks away from where Harry Houdini lived in New York City on 113th Street. And there's a plaque on the wall outside the building. Uh, and hang on a second. A plaque on the wall that says that Houdini lived in this house for the last 22 years of his life. And I thought, gee, Houdini's a really fascinating character. What if a kid grew up in Harry Houdini's house? And Houdini, of course, died in 1926. I thought, what if a kid grew up in Harry Houdini's house and found a way to communicate with the spirit of Houdini by text message? So that was the story of
That that
Houdini.
that's an oy vey because Houdini fought his entire life against spiritualism.
Spiritual. Yes, exactly. Right. So it was a fascinating story. And Elizabeth was the editor of this. And then she said, "Hey, let's do something else." And that's
Okay,
what inspired.
when we have coffee in New York, I got to get my greasy hands on that book.
Okay. And I'll take you to Houdini's house. How's that?
That's the best. That
Okay.
would be magical.
Yeah. Interesting story. If I can take just 1 minute.
It's your interview. You can take as many as you want.
Okay. Well, when I took that picture of the plaque on the wall, uh, it was just on a little 5-story building, a single family building. And I climbed up the steps, and I took this picture. And while I was taking the picture, a guy suddenly came out of the house and he was really angry and he started yelling at me. He says, "This is private property. Get off my porch. Leave me alone and don't come back." And I felt terrible about it. I slunk away, and I went home and my wife says, I told her the story. She says, "You know what you should do?" She says, "After the book comes out, you should give that guy a copy of the book." So I waited until the book came out, and I didn't want to confront him again. So I just put the book in a plastic bag with my business card and a note apologizing for trespassing on his property. A half an hour later, the guy calls me up on the phone. He says, "Oh, I'm so excited about your new book. I'm sorry I kicked you off my porch. Would you and your wife like to come over to the house sometime and get a tour of Houdini's house?" So we did. And so now that guy is a friend of mine. That's the story of Houdini and me. Anyway, Elizabeth is wonderful. And she, when I pitched her the idea of Cleopatra's Needle,
One second, there's one more book on the way.
Oh, yes. You want to get to that now?
Yeah, because we're trying to follow some logical illogic here.
Yeah, I'm sorry we're jumping around in time and all.
No,
But
that's okay. The
okay.
second book was
The second book is Cleopatra's Needle. The third book I've already finished. Should I talk about that now or later?
later.
Okay. So Cleopatra's Needle, I pitched the idea to Elizabeth. I said to her one day, I said, "Hey, you got an hour of time? Come to 81st Street and 5th Avenue and meet me there. And I want to show you something." And I took her behind the Metropolitan Museum of Art where Cleopatra's Needle is standing. And I said, "What do you know about this thing?" And she's like a lifelong New Yorker. She's been living here for like 40 plus years, whatever. And she says, I don't know anything about it. And I told her the whole story. And she said, "Let's do that book." So I wrote the book. And when I turned it in, she pointed out to me that these five kids I wrote about, she says, they're more just eyewitnesses. They're not really participants. And I think they need to be more invested in the story. They should have a more active role in the story. And I agreed with her. And so I rewrote the book to make these kids not just witnesses, but more participants in the story. And I dedicated the book to her because that was such an important change that made the book so much better.
Yeah, so the first one helps carve the obelisk, and then the second one is an artist.
Yeah, the first one was a slave
Yeah,
and there were thousands of slaves and prisoners who basically took 2 years to carve this thing out of a solid piece of granite in Aswan, Egypt. The second kid is a young artist who basically carved the hieroglyphics on Cleopatra's Needle. The third one was a girl who was I made her out to be a spy because when the Americans came and took Cleopatra's Needle away, hey, the locals were not all that happy. So some of them were very upset that the Americans came. To be fair, we didn't steal Cleopatra's Needle from them. It was a gift of the Egyptian government, which was in bad financial straits at the time, so they gave it to us.
the British are going to say the same about the Elgin marbles.
Right,
That we're not going to get into this.
Okay, some other time. The fourth one was a boy who stows away on the ship that brought Cleopatra's Needle to America.
The one who can't spell.
Yeah, I made him out to be an illiterate, actually.
And I wanted to ask you, how did you get away with this chapter where some words are misspelled and not corrected?
You should have seen the first draft. In the first draft, like every other word was spelled wrong. And Elizabeth said to me, I think you're overdoing it a little bit. It's kind of hard to read. So I cut it down significantly so that only some of the words are misspelled. But if you don't know how to read or write, that's the way you're gonna write. So that's him. And the next one was a girl in America.
She's my favorite.
Rebecca, yeah.
Yeah, she's my favorite.
In 1880, she basically lives in Manhattan, and she watches as Henry Goringe, the hero of the story, is a U.S. naval officer named Henry Goringe, who actually brought he bought the boat, he brought the needle down, he constructed an apparatus to lower it to the ground, he brought it across the ocean, erected it in Central Park. He's the hero of the story. She helps him somewhat, and she describes the final episode where the needle actually is raised up in Central Park, and it was a sensation at the time. Nowadays, it's just standing there in the park, and thousands of people walk and jog and bike past this thing, and nobody pays any attention at all to it. But it was a sensation when it came to America in 1880. Anyway, and finally,
I can tell you the next time I bike in Manhattan, I'm going to take a good close look at it.
Oh, go up. It's free. It's standing there 24 hours a day. And there's a few little plaques on the wall describing what it is, but not much. I had to do a lot of research to find out more about it. And
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say the fifth child is a kid in the present day who was basically dragged to Central Park with his mother, and she's describing the whole story to him. So he lives in the present day, and that's the 6 kids.
Yeah, and but I like Rebecca. She's an inventor. She invents this lazy Susan that helps him redirect the obelisk. She's my favorite.
Well, what happened was that bringing it across Manhattan, they had to turn some corners, because there were existing streets there, and it took them like 6 days just to turn the first corner at 96th Street. And so in the story, the way I wrote it, Rebecca, she invents a lazy Susan, a giant lazy Susan that they use to turn it, and it changes it. So instead of taking 6 days to turn a corner, they could do it in 45 minutes. That was her contribution to the story.
So I'm going to come back to this mostly true story. The informational nonfiction, the historical fiction, nonfiction, the whole business between fiction and nonfiction, and why do people care so much about it? Because I think that you've done a splendid job here of telling a story that people have forgotten. And what is it? Historical nonfiction, historical semi-nonfiction, and who cares?
I don't know what you would call it if you had to label it, but I really do enjoy blending fact and fiction together. I've done it in a lot of my books. I don't know if you're a baseball fan or not, but I did a series of baseball card adventures about this kid who travels through time with baseball cards and goes on adventures with various baseball players from the past, like Jackie Robinson and Babe Ruth and so on. And that was when the first time I started blending fact and fiction together. And it allows me to like tell a cool story and also maybe teach a little history lesson to kids so that they don't even realize they're learning something, you know.
I just, for the record, in the 60s, I was a huge Yankees fan. You know, Mickey Mantle, Roger Maris, Yogi Berra, I was going to say the whole 9 yards, but that's a different sport. So now take us back. We've introduced your wonderful new book. Take us back to the very young Dan Gutman and tell us all about your life with the angst and how you decided to become a children's author.
Sure. I'll try not to bore anybody with my boring life story, but
Well, make some of it up. You like to make something.
it's the mostly true story of me. Well, I was born in New York City, but I grew up in New Jersey, spent most of my life there, and I in college I never knew I was going to be a writer. It never crossed my mind actually. Although I do remember when I was a kid growing up, I'd be in class and the teacher would say, you know, write an essay about what you did over your summer vacation or whatever. And I'd see the other kids kind of struggling to put a sentence together. But for me, it was just like having a conversation with somebody. It came very naturally to me. But it didn't occur to me to write for a living until I was in my 20s.
Okay. Well, then we'll talk about your childhood.
Okay.
Were you a bit of a troublemaker in school?
No.
So I mean, and all these stories, these 100 stories, my weird school. You're not grinding an axe here.
No, not at all. This is the 100th My Weird School book, by the way. Yeah, this is my most successful series that I've done. No, I was a good student. I liked school, but I think good students who like school don't make really interesting stories. You know, what makes an interesting story is conflict. You know, so I like to I this series based about the kids are pretty normal and all the grown-ups are out of their minds because I figure that kids like to read about grown-ups doing dumb things.
So you were kind of a goody two-shoes in school. I find it's hard to believe, but I'll believe you if you tell me.
I was a good student. I aimed to please. I wasn't a troublemaker. The only time I ever got in trouble at school was I remember in shop class. Shop, by the way, for people who don't remember what shop is, in school they put all the boys and separate all the boys from the girls. The girls would go to home economics, which was sewing and cooking, and
Home ec.
the boys would go to shop and they would build stuff out of wood, basically. So I was in shop, and the kids in the class would we would taunt each other. We would make fun of each other, and I couldn't stop myself from laughing. So I would always get in trouble for laughing and have to go sit in the corner. That's the worst trouble I ever got into. Okay. Where was I? Oh, it was a
You
pretty
were
normal
you were in New York mostly,
New Jersey.
and then you were in New Jersey.
Yeah. And it was a pretty normal childhood until June 1st, 1968, when I had a Little League game. I was playing baseball, and I came home from my Little League game, and my father abandoned my family. He moved to Florida without telling anybody, and I didn't speak to him for over 10 years. It was
Wow.
probably the most traumatic thing that ever happened in my life. Um,
So
anyway,
you were 13, 14.
12.
12.
Yeah. So, I'll never know how my life would have been different if that hadn't happened to me. But I'd like to think that it made me a pretty strong individual, made me grow up fast, and made me a better father than my father was to me. I have two kids of my own. Anyway, how do we get on that?
Wonderful. Well, I knew about it, but I was waiting for you to tell the story.
Okay.
I've interviewed really, I don't know, 190 people, but over 170 for sure. And writers usually have an angst. They write to a pain. This is what I believe. Um, and we can talk about this a bit later and whether you recognize this in your writing. Um, because there's so few people that become writers and so few people that become successful writers, and nobody like you. So keep on. You're on a roll. Keep on going.
Okay.
What did
So
you
anyway,
study at college?
psychology. I majored in psych. I even went to graduate school for 2 years in psychology, figuring I was going to become a psychologist. And I really didn't like graduate school. I realized right away it wasn't for me. And I started thinking, well, uh, what am I good at? What do I like to do? And I always enjoyed writing letters to my friends. As I mentioned earlier, writing just came naturally to me. So I said, okay, I'm going to move to New York City where all the starving writers go, and I'm going to become a writer. And in the beginning, I wasn't thinking of writing for kids. It didn't cross my mind to write for kids. I wanted to be like, if you recall, Art Buchwald and Irma Bombeck.
I
They wrote,
love Art Buchwald.
yeah,
I
I wanted to, go
I
ahead.
grew up on Art Buchwald.
Really?
Yes.
Wow. Most people don't even know who that is.
He had,
But
I'll tell you, my wife is sitting over there. She doesn't know, but Art Buchwald once had a column, how to get along with your wife. I'm assuming you're happily married, but the secret to be happily married is always answering your wife. Like if she asks you a question, what's the temperature going to be today? Even if you don't know, you say it's going to be 73, a little cloudy. And he had this whole column on that, and it works. But
I,
we're
I wanted to write humorous essays like Art Buchwald and Irma Bombeck. And so I tried some of that. I wasn't very successful at it. And then Dave Barry came along and doing exactly that. And he was hilarious. And I said, I can't compete with that. So I tried writing other stuff. I tried writing newspaper articles, magazine articles, nonfiction, uh, anything I could. And I wasn't really good at it. I wasn't really successful at it. And then I decided to I started a magazine about video games. This was in the early 80s, back in the Pac-Man, when the Pac-Man craze was huge. I started a magazine called Video Games Player. Um, and it ran for a couple of years till it went out of business. But it allowed me to write my first book. My first book, Mel. Here it is. I didn't know you could do that with a computer. Okay. It's about like weird software that people could buy and use on their personal computers. The personal computer was quite young back in the early 80s. And so that allowed me to write my first book. And I didn't have any big success with it, but I started to write about other things that interested me, like baseball.
hold on a second.
And
Were you able to make a living
yeah,
during these years?
not a good one. But the nice thing is, when you're in your 20s, you haven't gotten married yet, you don't have kids, you don't have a house, you don't have to make a lot of money. So I was scraping by, and hey, back in the 1980s, you could rent an apartment in New York for like $300 a month. So, you didn't have to be so successful. And so I was scraping by, and um, then something amazing happened. My son was born, okay, in 1990, my son Sam. And I started reading a lot of children's books with him for the first time since I was a kid. And I thought, let's try writing for kids. And as soon as I started writing for kids, Mel, I felt this is what I'm good at. This is what I should have been doing all along. I relate really well to kids. So I started writing for kids. I had some minor successes. I wrote a book called The Kid Who Ran for President, 1996. This was my first successful book. Some people might know me from this book called The Homework Machine. which was also inspired by my son, who'd come home from school and say, "Oh man, I had to work all day in school, and now I come home and I got to do homework. It's not fair." So I wrote the homework machine.
That's actually very Jules Verne of you, because
You
my
think
students are now doing all their essays with AI, you know.
it's funny how kids will say to me like, "Hey, did you invent time travel?" I say, "No, H.G. Wells invented time travel in 1895." Anyway, I've done a lot of books, and as I mentioned earlier, My Weird School, I started in 2004, and this is the 100th book in the series. I've been doing it for 20 years now, so this is my biggest success.
Yeah, but hold on, that there's a missing piece here.
What is it?
The missing piece is how you broke in, how you found publishers, agents, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, you just don't wake up one morning and publish a book.
Right. Yes.
Maybe you do, other people don't.
Well, I remember, yeah, it's sort of a catch-22 in publishing, that you can't really get published unless you have an agent, and you can't get an agent unless you've been published. So what I did was I wrote to like 100 different agents. I'm the kind of person who, I may not be the best writer in the world, but I can outwork anybody. Okay. So I wrote 100 letters to 100 different agents. I think I got maybe 3 responses or 4 responses. And one of them.
This was with a self-addressed stamped envelope or internet?
Oh, this is before the internet. Oh, yeah. This
Sure,
is.
with the envelopes.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh.
Envelopes and stamps.
All right.
No computers at all.
All right.
So I did find my first agent that way. And so when I started to write books for grownups, like the computer book, when I decided to try writing for kids, I asked one of my editors at Viking, which published one of my books. I said, "Could you introduce me to a children's book editor and a children's book agent?" And so he introduced me to Elizabeth, and
Wow.
who was working at Viking at the time. And Elizabeth introduced me to my agent, Liza Voges. And she and I had lunch together yesterday, and we've been working together now for 30 years.
Wow.
So it was kind of a long, slow, gradual process. And I always tell young people getting started, I say, you know, anything in the creative arts, be it writing or singing or acting or music, you know, it's very tough to make a living, you know. But I always say, try everything. You know, you don't know what's going to work, and if something doesn't work, you try something else, and you keep trying all different things until you finally the walls break down and you find the thing that you're good at and you can make a living at. And I pinch myself every day, because there's lots of children's book authors who wish they had a series as successful as mine, and they wish they could publish books, but it's tough, and it's getting tougher too.
So My Weird School, how did that happen?
Yes.
This is your hit it out of the park success, over 100 books, maybe
Yeah.
40 million sold. I don't know, I can't keep track of you.
35 actually.
Yeah, but by the time the
Million.
interview is finished, it'll be 40.
This one is they don't sell that fast, Mel. But it was my daughter Emma.
That was my daughter. I know. Sorry.
Your daughter is named Emma too?
No.
Oh,
My
okay.
daughter's name-
Okay. So my
Dan,
daughter.
the show is about you.
Okay. She was.
I don't get kissed every interview. It just happened.
Okay. She was 5 years younger than my son, Sam. And she came along, and I was writing mostly for older kids at the time, you know, 4th, 5th, 6th graders. And I was doing a lot of school visits, as we do, we children's book authors. And I didn't have anything to say to the little ones. You know, they want you to talk to everybody in the school. I didn't have anything to say to the little ones. And I thought, gee, it would be really nice to write something for kids my daughter's age, 2nd grade. So my daughter was reading Junie B. Jones, which is a really successful series and still is. And I thought, there should be something like Junie B. Jones told by a boy. And that's what inspired my weird school. It's sort of like I sort of reverse engineered a Junie B. Jones book. I counted the number of pages, the number of words, the number of chapters, the number of pictures, and I wrote kind of my version from a boy's point of view, an obnoxious little boy, by the way. And the first book was called Miss Daisy is Crazy. They all have rhyming titles. Mr. Klutz is nuts, Mrs. Rupee is loopy, and so on. And it took a while. It took a few years for the series to catch on, but gradually it did. And the publisher, which is HarperCollins, asked me to write 4 more and 4 more and 4 more. And 20 years went by, and now we're up past 100. That's my weird school.
Are you still writing them?
I am, yes.
You haven't run out of rhymes.
That's not the problem, Mel. The problem is there's only so many grown-ups who work at a school, and each book focuses on a different grown-up. So, in the beginning, it was the teacher, the art teacher, the music teacher, the health teacher, and so on. And now I'm really scraping the bottom of the barrel. And I've written about the therapy dog, an art history professor who comes in to talk to the kids, the guy who mows the lawn outside the school. And the next one I'm working on, it's going to be called Miss Sherman is Determined. And she's sort of like a teenage influencer who is hired as a teacher's aide to come into the school. And she's obsessed with getting likes and clicks on social media. And she's trying to go viral. And that's what this one's going to be about.
Have you written one about yourself? The Michigan author who comes to visit the school.
Well, I did write about an author coming to the school. Yes, it was not me, but it was called Miss Suki is Kooky. And she visits the school and hilarity ensues, basically.
So do you want to, before we talk about serious stuff, do you want to comment on my theory, trash it, that the folks that we write for children write to our 12-year-old child within us, or for me, our 5 and 6-year-old?
I'm gonna have to think about that, Mel. I don't know. I don't know. In my case, obviously something traumatic happened to me in my youth, and it must have influenced me. I don't really get a sense that it impacted my work, really. I mean, some people suffer a traumatic event in their lives and they fall apart, and other people, it somehow makes them stronger. But I, for the most part, write silly, fluffy books for kids, and I could have had any background to end up that way. Maybe your theory has validity, and maybe it's just a load of crap.
It could be, but look at this thing. It's a kind of a sharp weapon.
Yes, it is. It is.
Maybe it's just me, that my need to get even with this particular instrument.
Yes.
But you can cogitate on it, and we can talk. We can talk when we're spaziering in New York, and we'll say, "Oh, Mel,
By the way,
you weren't wrong. You were completely wrong."
By the way, often kids will say to me, "What do you need? What do you need to become a writer?" And I say, "You need 2 things. You need a pencil and a paper. That's it. No diploma, no nothing. Just a pencil and paper. That's all you need."
Was it you didn't join SCBWI? You didn't take courses, and
I'm a member of SCBWI, but no, I'm self-taught. And sometimes I think that that's a good thing, because a lot of authors, they studied children's literature, they studied writing novels and all, and I guess they learned the rules of writing. And I feel like by not knowing the rules going in, I had to figure it out on my own, what makes a good story. And so I was more free to break the rules than maybe somebody who went to school for it.
that reminds me of another book we're not going to talk about this time, but we're going to talk about next time, which is the Beatles, who really didn't read music, but understood it better than a lot of people who do read music.
They inspire me more than anybody.
Yeah.
People say, who are your influences? And I say, yeah, I wasn't a big reader when I was a kid. I didn't even like to read when I was a kid. I thought reading was boring and hard to do. But I always admired creative people. So my heroes growing up were like, Thomas Edison, the Wright brothers, Picasso, and more than anybody else, the Beatles.
Which of them?
Which Beatle? All of them.
Pick one.
Paul.
Good choice.
If I had to.
In my previous these interviews grew out of a previous interview that I had a show called You've Got Mel, where I interviewed all kinds of people, and at the end of the show they had to sing a Beatles song. So you have like about 3 minutes to pick a Beatles song that you want to sing, and I'm going to have you back in a few months to talk about your Beatles book from last year, because I am intrigued, and I'm also a huge Beatles fan, and they of course changed my life as well. And so we will hopefully have another session on your
You
book.
Want me to sing a song?
We have 2 minutes to decide which one.
2 minutes. Hold on. I'll be right back. Don't go away, Mel.
Okay. Okay, this hasn't happened recently. So, hi, everybody. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Mel Rosenberg. I'm the host of the Children's Literature Channel of the New Books Network. And I am here with Dan Gutman, who has miraculously, Houdini-like, reappeared with a guitar.
All right. You ready, Mel?
I'm ready.
Okay.
This is a big surprise. Now I can't hear you. Say something, Dan.
You don't hear it?
No, because Zoom has cut out the extraneous noise.
Oh, okay. I was playing Here Comes the Sun on my guitar.
Okay, well, you can sing it. You can sing it a cappella, and we'll pretend we're hearing the guitar.
Okay. Little darling, it's been a long, cold, lonely winter. Little darling, it seems like years since it's been here. Here comes the sun.
Da 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 da.
Here comes the sun, and I say it's all right. Anyway, that's how it goes.
Beautiful.
I wish you could have heard it.
So listen, we're going to change when we meet up in Central Park. We'll change our venue maybe and meet in John's little area there.
Strawberry Fields?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll take you there.
You'll bring your guitar, and I'll bring my my vocals.
I'll take you to Strawberry Fields, and I'll take you to Cleopatra's Needle. They're right across the park.
We got a deal.
Okay.
We got a deal. So, we're nearing the end of our interview, and it's been wonderful. Now's a good time to ask you, with all your experience, 190 books, what other advice do you have for all the other aspiring children's authors that are listening in right now?
Well, a couple of things. I always say that persistence is probably more important than talent. It's just not easy. There's a lot of people want to do this. It's hard to do, but you got to really bust your butt. So that's one thing. The other, I'll give you a more specific piece of advice, which is something that I discovered myself. When you write something, when you write your first draft, okay, read it and read it out loud. And here's a little trick that I use, okay? While you're reading what you wrote out loud, pretend to be somebody else. Pretend to be a friend or a teacher or a librarian or a complete stranger. And while you're reading what you wrote...
Or Stalin.
Exactly. Anybody. While you're reading what you wrote, almost through somebody else's eyes, you could see the mistakes that you made, and you could see how your writing could be smoother. And that's something that I do in my writing, and I think it would work for anybody. So that's some advice.
That's
and
great.
also they should read my book, My Weird Writing Tips. Okay.
You have a book, My Weird Writing Tips.
I do, yes.
Among the 190.
It's on the wall. It's on the wall.
Okay, so we're going to sum up here. We've had an incredible journey with Dan Gutman, the author of 190 books. Most recently, the mostly true story of Cleopatra's Needle, out just a month ago by Holiday House, dedicated to the wonderful Elizabeth Law. And in final, you can't say that in English, in final. In closing, in conclusion, you promised to tell us what book you're working on, which is the third.
Yes, Elizabeth and I are working on another book, and it's going to be called The Picasso Curse. And I'll just briefly sum it up, which is that for years I've been fascinated by the story of how the Mona Lisa was stolen from the Louvre Museum in Paris in 1911, and it was missing for 2 years. Most people don't even know about this, but it happened. And one of the main suspects of the crime was Pablo Picasso, who was a young artist living in Paris at the time. And because the Louvre was filled with these classic Renaissance paintings, people felt that like a young radical like Picasso might have just been the kind of person who would have stolen it. So they hauled him in for questioning. And I thought, this is a great story. I got to be able to use this in a book somehow. So here's what I decided. Okay, while Picasso was being questioned, he was constantly doodling and drawing and creating artwork. And while he was waiting to be questioned, he created a doodle, and then he threw it in the garbage can. Okay. And then the janitor picked it out of the garbage can and put it up on his wall. And over the next 100 years, I trace what happened to that doodle that Picasso made until it ends up at a flea market in Illinois, where some kid buys a poster, like a poster of like a Kobe Bryant, a basketball player. And he takes the frame off, and this original Picasso doodle falls out. And the rest of the story is all the positive and mostly negative things that happen to this kid after he suddenly finds an original Picasso. That's the Picasso.
How much of this is a true story?
All of the stuff that happened in Paris and Picasso and the Mona Lisa is true. All of what happened after it came after, well, he never made the doodle. Everything else is my imagination.
So
and by the way, Picasso, like just about, he lived into his 90s, but just about everybody he came into contact with died tragically, had a nervous breakdown, had a drug overdose or something. So that's why it's called the Picasso curse, because this kid's life is basically ruined by what happened to him. That's my next.
Incredible. Remind me to tell you the Beatles story the next time when we get together, or maybe the next. Yeah. So this has been great. I've been talking with the wonderful Dan Gutman, the unbelievably, incredibly prolific author of 190 children's books, which have sold well over 35 million copies, which makes you some kind of world record holder.
No.
And I've been very thrilled to interview you. And we will share coffee together next month in Central Park. And for the rest of you, the only recourse that you have is to run out and buy Dan's brand new book, The Mostly True Story of Cleopatra's Needle, which was published last month by Holiday House. I've read it, and it's a treasure. 3,500-year-old treasure. Dan, it's been great. Take care.
You too, Mel. Thanks so much for having me on.
It was my pleasure. See you soon.
I'll see you in Central Park. And thanks to Elizabeth. Maybe she'll join us in Central Park.
Yes, absolutely.
Bye now.